this a problem, and what does this do to the developing nuclear industry? Are we able to work around or recover from this kind of regulation?
There are a number of opinions that are out there. Let me just give you the topology of the landscape, if I may, and I'll let you draw your conclusions where you think where you think infrastructure should be built or not, given that landscape. The current mindset in nuclear science and technology is when we do a design, we assume that the worst thing that could possibly happen, it happens, and that the design has to make that okay so that nobody gets hurt. So a great example would be 3 Mile Island, right? You had a partial meltdown of a nuclear reactor, and the offsite release to the average member of the public was about 1 day's worth of natural background radiation. That was extremely expensive, but that was the design criteria. That was how it was. That was the intent. Now, it terrified people, and it largely stopped nuclear energy, even though it was an incredibly innocuous release. It was just a public relations fiasco, a media fiasco, and there were a lot of lessons learned. Fukushima is another good example. That one, you actually had three full meltdowns, three reactors full meltdown. And if you look at what the United Nations said, the World Health Organization, all of the review papers, even in Fukushima, there was not enough radioactivity released to produce any expected measurable medical effects in the Japanese public ever. Remember that threshold of 10 to 20 rem for any kind of statistically significant increase? That's the limit for what we got from the atomic bomb survivors. Evacuation criteria is about 10% of that. So the evacuation criteria is around 1 to 5 rem. Typically, international values are 2 rem. And in the United States, the minimum is about 1 rem. Again, this is on the order of a fraction, less than 10% of that statistical threshold. That's where evacuation takes place. And so the public got less than that, less than 1 rem. Where 1 rem is about what you get for a nuclear medicine scan. Or a CT scan to the head or hip. And that's the threshold for evacuation. The idea, again, being that the worst that could possibly happen is that nobody gets hurt. Now, there's a price you pay for that monetarily. If you're going to design something that's safe, think if you decided you were going to have to do that with a car, right? We could design a car like that so that it could roll down a cliff. It could get into a tunnel fire. It could fall onto a big boulder. It could fall into a lake, and everybody has to be able to walk away. We could design a car like that. It would not be cheap. It would not be easy, and it would be very expensive. And that's the design spec that we have for nuclear. Now, a lot of people like that. They want a car like that, right? Maybe it's, I don't know, for some people, the ideal car, and they're willing to spend, $1 million to have a car like that because it's worth it to them. That's basically where we are with nuclear energy, is that there has to be effectively a negligible risk. Now, the reason why there are people that come to the other side is, man, we accept all kinds of risks every day, just not leaving the house. We have massive risks, substantially greater than that. And then once we go out of the house, the risks just increase. And if you go to work, those risks increase even further. And we should have something that's commensurate, right? So if you say in the medical field, I think in England, if a life-saving treatment costs more than $40,000 and you're over a certain age, they won't pay for it, right? So there's a price per life based on how much money is there. And if you use something like that with nuclear and you said everybody else has to meet the same standard, nuclear would suddenly become by far and wide the cheapest, most efficient, the fastest, if everything else had to make the same risk metrics for the damage to the public and the worker, to what extent that they could get hurt. And so that's why there are some people that think that we're spending way too much money, right? Where I used to work at the WIP, the limit for it was the EPA license. The limit that they had was 10 millirem. That's about the dose you get internally, 10 millirem per year. That's about what you get from internal potassium, the minimum. You can get 5 times that easy just because potassium is naturally radioactive and you die without it. But that was the offsite limit for the EPA. And when they actually had a release, it was about 1% of that. That was the release that they had, and it still terrified people. But then they spent well over $1 billion to try to maintain that level of release, right? And so that kind of puts it into perspective how much money we spend even though the media, they spun it up. That terrified people. And that's the kind of things that happen, like the water from Fukushima, right? There was a big media spin on that, but the levels of radioactivity that were in the water were substantially below that for drinking water standards. So, in other words, they were pouring potable water into the ocean, and it terrified people. It still terrifies people. And so they spent an enormous amount of money to make that happen. And so that's why there are a lot of people that say we're way overregulated. We're requiring far less risk than makes sense, and that we need to change that. But then other people say, well, I like it this way, right? This is my $1 million car. That means I can do all those things and not have any problems, right? Because I'm sure if you had a car like that and it cost $1 million, some people would buy some. Maybe only a handful, right? Only the billionaires might buy them, but that's basically what we're looking at with nuclear energy, because people are just so afraid of it that in order to get the kind of support you need, or that in the past to actually implement this technology, we had to have those risks that low.
So we've had some exciting news in the last few weeks. The Advance Act passed in Congress, and this is targeting some reforms at the NRC and some staffing up and helping out with new nuclear developments. Have you been following this? Does this encourage does this encourage you and make you think that maybe we could start to work on this overregulation problem?
It does. With the transition in the administration, it turns out that nuclear is in a sweet spot. For the Democrats, nuclear is the environmental solution. It's just got a tiny little footprint, and it gives you an enormous amount of benefit. For the Republicans, it gives you energy security. And so so it gets bipartisan support like that. And so it's in a sweet spot in that sense. It's protected from in a sense, it's protected from the potential political instability that might come from a technology where there are political narratives that might be against it, like, say, for example, GMOs or vaccines. Right, depending on which political party you're in, they may be favoring it or they may be against it. And there are a number of other things one could bring up. In vitro fertilization. I don't know if that's still a political hot potato or not, but nuclear at the moment does enjoy bipartisan support.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we get through our show? And just to note, the live stream of this is going to be awful. I'm really sorry for that, but I've been fighting the internet, I guess, all morning, and so we've got a recording for at least the second half, and we'll edit that and put that back up. So anyone who's finally caught the end of us, look for the re-release on our channel this week. So yeah, Robert, anything else you'd like to bring to our attention before we close up?
Yeah. I would say, almost as a general rule, there are exceptions. Almost as a general rule, any narrative, any anti-nuclear narrative that you hear that brings about a visceral response, the truth generally is going to be just the opposite. Now, let me give you an example. This is my favorite example. So I'm going to list off a bunch of facts and see if I can evoke a visceral response, a fear response from you, just by listing off a bunch of facts. All right, so there is a compound. This compound is the predominant compound in every deadly cancer, the predominant compound in every deadly bacteria. It's the kind of stuff that you find in the kind of concentrated acid that can just dissolve your skin. Everybody who has ever ingested this has died or will die. Thousands of people die every year from breathing this compound. It is that bad. Now, if you knew that was true, that would sound like this is the scariest stuff that has ever existed, that makes plutonium look like a walk in the park, right? But everything I just said is definitively true for water. The primary compound in cancer, in bacteria, in acid. Anybody that thousands of people die from breathing it every year. Anybody who has ingested it will die or has died. Right? But it's water. And it's the same kind of thing you can do with nuclear science and technology. that I just gave with anti-nuclear narratives, right? I remember reading or reviewing a book, an anti-nuclear book, just being a reviewer, and they pointed out that nuclear reactors are able to release millions and millions of attocuries of radioactivity without reporting it. And an attocurie, if you don't know what it is 10 to the minus 18. So when you have millions of it, right, you still got 10 to the minus 12. And so we're talking picocuries of activity as a small fraction of natural background. And so, yeah, you don't need to report it. But if you spin it that way, it sounds horrible. Millions and millions of attocuries. Or when you talk about used nuclear fuel, right? If you list it off in pounds, it sounds enormous. This problem, that sounds like this unsurmountable problem with nuclear waste that means that you should ban nuclear energy because this problem with nuclear waste. But even with all of the spent nuclear fuel that we generate in the United States, we've gotten about 20% of our electricity for about 50 years. Biggest economy in the planet. The planet's never known an economy like this. 50 years, 20% of that electricity, all of that used nuclear fuel would not fill up a single football field above 10 meters high, right? And when you look at it in context, it's like, that's really not a big deal, but it can sound horrendous when you hear the narratives, right? Well, what if this and what if that? And you remember that example I gave you about that car? That's what these casks have to meet. They have to be able to drop 8 feet onto an unyielding surface at their weakest point. They have to drop 40 inches onto an unyielding spike. They have to be in a tunnel fire for half an hour, almost 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. They have to be submerged in water. All of these sequentially without leaking, and then you can get a license. And that's not cheap, but it's almost indestructible. I mean, you could destroy it, but it's virtual. I mean, those things are just incredibly hard to do any damage to by design, right? So that the worst thing that could possibly happen is it doesn't leak. Nobody gets hurt. And so the narratives that you see are generally, I guess they seem to be far more like The Simpsons than anything else that I could talk about. But that's the picture that people have, or the Fukushima water, right? Potable water. Tritium's natural. Always has been, always will be. It's created in the same way that carbon-14 is that we use for radiocarbon dating. It's created in the upper atmosphere. There's an enormous amount in the ocean. And so it's everywhere, always has been and always will be at trace values. If you look at the numbers that are scaring people, the amount that I have in an exit sign, you can have easily 20 curies in an exit sign, and you could have an exit sign at every exit in a school, public school. And so you could easily have a couple hundred curies there, and they'll say, well, that's what a nuclear power plant can release. Hundreds of curies of tritium. It's not that big of a deal. It comes down to the dose. What's the risk? And if you miss that, right, like with water, if you miss the risk, the contextual risk, then you can just get terrified. You can get hyped up and completely take it out of context because you're able to spin these narratives to make it sound horrific. Dihydrogen monoxide. That's the evil compound that's in every deadly cancer, every deadly bacteria, that thousands die from breathing every year. It's easy to spin a narrative if that's your intention to do so, rather than looking at what the science says and taking it in context from what the scientists would say. Well, what is the place of water in our lives? It's essential to life. You die without it, literally. Like energy, I would say energy is essential to life. Energy is life. For us in a modern society, energy is life. So I hope that helps.
Yes, it absolutely does. This has been the Eco-Modernist Channel Live. Thank you all for your participation and ideas. Thank you so much, Robert, for being our guest this week. You can find us every Sunday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, right here on YouTube at Eco-Modernist 1 or the Eco-Modernist Channel. You can find us on Facebook at the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. Please support us on Patreon. Look for the Eco-Modernist Channel there. And you can find us online at ESNA.earth. That's ESNA.earth. You can find us also rebroadcast to a few of my personal channels, Soyaddle on Twitch, soyaddle.tv, and several other places, like my personal x.com and LinkedIn. I'm Carl Pauls, and remember, emissions first, peace and justice will follow.
I want to speak to you about a new organization called the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. Eco-modernism is a new environmental paradigm which looks to reverse the fear of nuclear power and scientific progress in general. Ecology-based modernism is the most direct way to define it. Eco-modernism as a philosophy is described in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto. We believe humanity should not be rejecting technological progress, but rather separate our impacts from nature through the responsible use of technology and urbanization. Urbanization is an unstoppable worldwide trend and the best solution to many environmental problems. It offers sustainable development for the human population and is a historic antidote to both deforestation and species extinction as humans move away from using wildlife as their protein source. Vertical, urban, high-rise architecture minimizes the use of land, resources, and energy, enabling walkable cities that facilitates the more efficient use of mass public transit as well. It must be emphasized that our support for technological solutions is definitely not about defending industrial polluters, nor does our defense of technology imply that we just need to sit back and let things take care of themselves. To the contrary, we believe that humanity is at a crossroads that severely threatens our future on this planet. I hope by now you understand the worthiness of our cause. Eco-modernism is really only a philosophy at this time. I want to talk